Hi, everyone. My name is Brigitte Knapp, and I'd just like to thank Elizabeth very much for putting this conference on. And I just feel like this is a very important get-together to, bring a lot of this new information that's coming out to light in more sort of a formalized way so that we can have more of a robust scientific discussion about things. And just to, inspire people who might not know much about this material to probe a bit deeper. So as you know, this is what history taught us, and this is what it was, as some of our other wonderful presenters have shown. And clearly it was not people with horse and buggies and hammers and chisels who built the magnificent cathedrals like this. And the other thing I want to bring up today, and I'm talking about, is meltologii. That's the phenomenon of red bricks turning into what we think of as millions of years old geological strata. So you can see here, this is clearly bricks that have been crystallized, and then this is what geologists would call a blocky sandstone. And just for my background, I am a geologist. I have a master's degree in geology. So it was a bit of a shock to me to realize that the rocks might not be quite as old as I thought. And it's been really fascinating to look at the landscape in a totally different way. So one of the things I'm trying to do with this presentation is introduce to you the way that I see the world. And it's just a theory. And I think it's really important that everybody keeps an open mind. It isn't too attached to one thing or another, but I think there's an overwhelming amount of evidence for meltology. And I'm going to be showing you some of those examples. So you can find me and my husband, Thomas, who I'd also like to thank tremendously for contributing to this presentation just through our many conversations. We're at Taurus Mundi, and I've put two previous videos out. Dunedin, the city that magically appeared, which was about the old world Tartarian style architecture in New Zealand, Dunedin. And then this one, Rocks or Ruins, which was more focused on the phenomenon of meltology. So there's a bit more, it goes into a bit more detail there. And this is the third part in the series, which is called Architectural Stratigraphy, which is trying to bring those two worlds together and, figure out what the heck's going on. As Levi and a few others have pointed out, the narratives just don't make any sense with these World Spheres buildings. And I'm going to just show you another few examples of that. So for the St. Louis World Fair, they say that this was a 7-month exhibition. So they created this 1,200-acre park in the forest in St. Louis, and it took them 3 to 4 years to build. Over 1,500 structures, which they say were made of plaster and hemp, and yet they mimicked a classical stone architecture on a massive scale. So how on earth did they design such intricate buildings so quickly? It makes absolutely no sense. There's another shot of the St. Louis World Fair, and you can see fountains, and it really does not look like temporary structures. And these people do not look like they had much to do with these buildings. And you might notice for a World's Fair, there's not that many people at all. A lot more people there. So the style of this architecture actually mimics the classical Greco buildings, which, in the official architectural narrative, those buildings are 2,000 to 2,500 years old. So, why were they making buildings that look like this, that were from architecture 2,000 years ago? They'll say that it's because they were inspired by them. Okay, but it was, 2,000 years ago, and we're still designing things in the same way. And again, Chicago World's Fair, and just what it looks like today, which is very sad. And we're going to see quite a few pictures that make you feel sad about, what we were living with and what we live with now. So I just wanted to put this up. This is from one of the really big promoters in the meltology community, Desmond. Shout out to the meltology community. But when you go behind a lot of these concrete facades, you see red bricks. There was a lot of liquid concrete around in the old world for sure, but a lot of the time when you go behind the exterior, it's red brick. And this is a neoclassical building that's Penn Station in New York, and that's no longer there now. That was built between 1905 and 1910. When it officially opened, and they use that word a lot, like opened, established, founded. So they built that building officially in 1910, it opened, and 55 years later, it was torn down. 55 years later, that's the length of time that this magnificent building lasted in the official story. Here it is. And this is what it was replaced with, Madison Square Garden, which is now the site of that original train station. There's still, you can see the original, one of the original buildings was left, and it's now the current Penn Station. So as I said before, 2,500 years that separate those time periods between neoclassical and classical. And, you see a lot of similarities in the style of architecture between what they call ancient Greece and Rome, and neoclassical. The neoclassical styles are a little more ornate. There's a lot more ornamentation, but, you still get the same porticos and arches are very prevalent. And the city's being laid out in a system. So just to give you an example of a grid system, this is a Timgad in Algeria, which in Northern Africa was absolutely full of beautiful cities. And so was Southern Africa. Now it's all been destroyed. So only the triumphal arch remains, and the rest of it, as you can see, is laid out in a grid system, and there's not much left. And you can see types of architecture that look quite Roman, like a sort of an amphitheatre, which is like a Colosseum, or this sort of structure here, like a circus. And this is just to show you that the triumphal arches were like a signature piece of architecture for the ancient Romans. And you can see that you get the same style of architecture in Algeria, Timgad, ancient Rome, obviously. There's a triumphal arch, which is completely mud flooded. And this is the Roman Forum today. And so this is the heart of ancient Rome. And this triumphal arch is still standing. So that's the same one as we saw in this picture here, I believe. And you can see that it was buried, quite deep in mud. And now it's been and excavated. So we also see that same style of arch in New York City. So there's about 1800 years separating these two pictures, and yet they look very similar. So it begs the question, what's going on with time? Because we see the same style of architecture over a 2,500-year period, and this one's from 1915, San Francisco, again, they say this was built as a temporary structure from plaster and wood, and that does not seem likely to me, because they managed to light it up like a Christmas tree as well. This is also in San Francisco, the World's Fair, and we see this one's a bit later, but they had AC power by then. But the 1893 Chicago World's Fair was also lit up like a Christmas tree, and you have to wonder how on earth they did it at the time with the, technology that they supposedly didn't have. So, and the narrative on our New World cities is really skewy. As a lot of researchers in this conference have very well presented in the past. Like, this is how I got into the subject was just doesn't make sense what the population's numbers were for the narrative at the time of the formation of these cities. So San Francisco, this is a picture of San Francisco after the 1906 earthquake, and it's been completely leveled all out here. They say that San Francisco was founded in 1776, and as I said before, that means I believe that they literally found it. You can see on maps from 1500s and 1600s that San Francisco is actually clearly marked. So clearly it was there before 1776. And I just wanted to point out that this clock coastline, it's a magnificent city, port city, 1906. And this whole coastline here looks what I would like some commentators have called like an artificial coastline, and that's what it looks like to me too. And this is the Sutro Baths, which is on the edge of San Francisco and no longer exists, but you can see here that it's like they say that this was built like this, and it's like literally on the edge of a cliff. So I would argue that the ground underneath the structure has fallen away, and this is all that remains. And this is a Russian tourism map from 1794. They were visiting what they called Russian Orthodox churches all along the coast here, and you can clearly see that there are some absolutely magnificent buildings at a time when the western coast of the US was like supposedly horse and buggy, not even. It was just hardly anyone there, apparently. And this is from a magazine in 1744, which you can see as here's a native, and this is a South City, and like there's clearly like a lot of activity going on, and this is from 1744. And so the construction of these new world cities makes no sense. The low population size, unskilled labour, horse and buggy, hammer and chisel, and these ridiculous narratives that they make up, like the gold rush. So the project I did in Dunedin was focused, Dunedin was one of the gold rush towns. So that's how I got interested in this narrative. And then I started looking at Australia and also California, and realised that they had the same narrative as Dunedin. And so what they tell us is that these cities were all established in mid 1800s. And if you look up official government census numbers for the populations at that time, they're like nothing. And yet all of these magnificent cities were built, and they said that they were built because of the influx of money and industry due to the gold rush. But when you dig deeper into it, it doesn't make sense, especially when you look at the mode of transportation that they were using, which was very, very primitive at the time, according to the official narrative. And a lot of the New World didn't even have infrastructure, roads, sewage, trains, etc. So it really beggars belief to believe that they managed to build magnificent without cranes and excavation equipment and skilled labourers, which they also didn't have. And they like to say that these gold rush towns were very busy, but in fact there was a lot of the old photos show that there was hardly any people. This is in Melbourne, and you can see that there's no people here. This is in Melbourne also, and look at the magnificent buildings that you can see in the background. And I'd really like to thank Paula Kruger for her work on Melbourne. It's been really, really thorough, and I'd definitely recommend checking her out. She's on Autodidactics channel, and he's been wonderful, isn't it? And then this is Dunedin, which has a population of 30,000 according to the official government census numbers in 1874. And this was, also no people showing at the height of the gold rush, apparently. And absolutely beautiful architecture. This entire city, they say nothing was here before 1848. So you do the maths. Does that make any sense to you? There was nothing here except for a few Maori villages. And this is also in Dunedin. This is the most ridiculous of them all, the Seacliff Lunatic Asylum. This is what they say was built as a custom-built lunatic asylum for a handful of insane people, using 4.5 million red bricks assembled on site in undeveloped land 30 kilometres north of Dunedin, with a population of about maybe 40,000, a total population. And this is what Seacliff looks like. And you can see that the architecture itself is really different to the landscape. It doesn't match. And this is like a pioneering sheep farming fence. And clearly the people that built this, it's pretty unlikely that they also built this, which is the official story. And again, very sadly, this magnificent building was destroyed in the 1960s. And today, this is what remains of Seacliff. And you can see that there is red bricks behind there. This is what it looked like. This is a custom-built insane asylum. So what went wrong? This is what we have today. Gorgeous old world buildings replaced by cubic architecture that looks very ugly. Dresden before World War II was a magnificent Tartarian city, and they did use free energy to harness free energy from the ether to power their cities. This is what Dresden looked like after World War II, and they bombed Dresden after the war had finished, I believe. Same with Hiroshima, pre-1945. And this is what it looked like after the bombing. Absolutely devastating. So there's other things that make no sense. Charles has talked about the Moorish influence, and we see that right across the world. So this was a Moorish-style building that they said that was built for the Sioux City Fall Corn Festival as a temporary structure. In 1890, they said that this was all temporary plaster and everything. If you look at the type of people that were in Mount Montana in the 1860s, does that really make sense to you that they would build a building like that? And this was a natatorium, which was the world's largest indoor swimming pool in the time in 1889, which coincided with Montana's transition to statehood. In Helena, Montana, the population was 13,000 at the time. And this was also in a Moorish Spanish revival style. And that's just to show you the type of environment that the building was sitting in. It just makes no sense. Why would they build? Early Christian Montana settlers decide to build the world's largest indoor swimming pool in the middle of nowhere in a Moorish style. We believe in the Tartarian community that the building was already here. So we live on the top of buried, melted, and destroyed structures. Basically, what is meltology? Meltology challenges conventional geology by proposing that many of the Earth's most iconic landforms are not the result of millions of years of slow erosion, but instead may be the melted remains of once grand human-made structures. These structures have been deformed and melted by a cataclysm involving extreme heat. And we're going to talk about the plasma reset hypothesis and the mechanism by which you might see bricks melting at the surface there. And we're going to just I just like to shout out to the meltology community, because the presentation is really a collective effort. And I was not part of the meltology original group, but I'm pretty close behind. And I really appreciate everybody in that community for all the work they've done. But I'd like to a special shout out to Deborah Simpson, Tara Johnson, and Joshua James for informing this presentation. And I'd also like to mention that the Rocks or Ruins video gives you a lot more links to other people, including Jerry DeCamp, who was the discoverer of meltology in 2000 and put out an excellent documentary called When the Buildings. And so we can see here, this is a representation of a fire plasma event. And we're going to be talking about plasma quite a lot in this presentation, because what we see preserved in the rocks is signs of electrical discharge, and we can actually see that here. And this is clearly rock, and this is clearly brick, and you can see all little lightning fractal patterns in between. And this is a example from my work with Rocks or Ruins, but geologists have a problem with calling everything millions of years old, because they would look at this picture and say that this rock here was millions of years old, officially up to 3 million years old on the official narrative, and this was only hundreds of years old. So what happened? This is clearly structural. This is a part of this was structural, but now it looks like rock. So where do the 1,200-year-old ruins start and the million-of-year geological sediments stop? Same with the Meroe pyramids in Sudan. The pyramids are 2,000 years old. The bedrock is 6 million. And how the desert surface, these structures are disintegrating into the desert, and you'll notice that the red color is probably from iron oxide in the red bricks. And if you look at the inside of these pyramids, they actually are brick. The outside has been metamorphosed into a stone block. So, got another picture. But yeah, you might be able to see it better on this photo, but this is in Iran. Red bricks underneath these structures, and then it changes into sandstone, what looks like sandstone, and then it's desert. And so as a geologist, you might come along here, and if you didn't see these little apertures, you might say this was, sandstone or stratified sandstone. But if you look up here, this is red brick. And then in the same desert, you get structures like that, which as a geologist, you would come along and say, this is millions of years old. But really, isn't it? Once you start looking at the world through the eyes of meltology, meltologists would interpret this as a remnant of this, but it's just more fried and cooked out, so that there's less evidence of the pre-existing structure. So just to reiterate, this is sort of modern geology, how we look at the world with, temperature and rocks needing to be subjected to extreme depth in order to be heated up. But in meltology, the heat can happen right at the surface. And it's very hard to convince people of this, because the way we think about modern geology with geochemistry, processes that form minerals are said to have happened over millions of years. But what we're finding in meltology is that it's more like alchemy than geochemistry, actually. The best way to describe this is through the popcorn analogy. When a corn kernel is in its raw state, it's a kernel, and then it pops and it turns into, it can completely changes morphology. So it's not a gradual change either, it's an instant change. So in meltology, and this is going to be hard for you to get your head around, guys, there's red bricks back here we can see, and meltologists would look at these and say that these are all what we call balloon rocks or popcorn bricks, which were actually originally red brick but have been transformed into stone. And so we're going to look at a few examples of that. So this is like what we call popcorn bricks, and in the early 1900s they called them clinker bricks. It was supposedly an arts and craft movement. So you can see here that the bricks are, distorted, flowing, clumping together. And the more deformed bricks are blacker because they've been more cooked out and burned. And some are turning into what we would call balloon rocks. So these bricks swell under intense heat and they start coalescing together. And you can see that in here, you can see that the bricks, you can see individual bricks, but it's turning into a big mass. So if you were a geologist and you saw this in the field and it was more advanced, you might call that a basalt or a vesicular basalt, something like that, without the surroundings. So the way that meltologists explain the very high temperatures required at the surface is through electromagnetic forces and plasma. And the best example to think of like that is if a red brick was struck by lightning, what might happen to it. So you could definitely create some extreme heat. I'm not going to go through all of these, but for those interested, you can get like silicification, cracking, swelling, and carbonization. Color change is very important. And there's a lot of different effects that can happen in meltology, and that's also something that's very hard for people to get their heads around. So when a meltologist looks at a landscape, they're going to look at something like the Bizliki caves in Turkey, and they're going to say, well, these caves, were they cut out from the rock by hand, which is the official story, or were they actually part of a melted structure? And what you're seeing here, observing here, is a pocket of survival in the landscape from a apocalypse, basically. And just to give you like a differentiation between the mud flood and meltology, because they are definitely related. This is evidence of the mud flood, where you see the arches are, covered up to the top there. The meltology is more about the melting of the arches themselves, but the two are definitely interrelated. Meltologists would call the mud flood more like a lot of brick ash that has particulate that's fallen down, but also massive flooding events and, organic material, just all sorts of stuff going on. And I'm going to explain how. This is a pocket of survival also. And meltologists would call this a rock curtain that comes down over the top of this. And you can just see the remnant right there. And the rest of the landscape is melting over this structure. So meltologists have kind of started by Jerry, but continued on by lots of other people in the community, like a vocabulary to describe the features that they're seeing. And I would highly recommend checking out some material I recommended in the last video if you're interested in this. Derinkuyu is probably the most famous city in the Cappadocia area, and you might have probably heard of it. But they say that this was carved out by hand, 280 feet deep, continuously occupied from 700 BCE till the Armenian genocide of 1920. So did they carve Derinkuyu out, or is it a buried structure? And if you look at Derinkuyu from an aerial perspective, it actually is circular. It's got a similar symmetry as many of the Star Wars cities. It may have originally been. And this is in India, the Ajanta caves, which are a series of 30 Buddhist rock cut caves. That's what they say. And mythologists would call it pockets of survival. And this is just an example of one of the magnificent temples that is inside the Ajanta system. And they would say that, look at that ornamentation on the columns, they would say that this is all rock cut with hand chisels. So we're getting to an interesting thing in this subject is what is geology really? Like if the rocks are basically melted architecture and trees, I'm going to talk about trees. If they're melted architecture, then what does that make a stratigraphic column that we think of as normally being millions of years old in geology? We need to rethink that, because you can see in this stack here, this looks like a natural rock formation, millions of years old, and then we have a completely symmetrical stone block back to laminated sandstone, and then down the bottom we have stone pillars with red bricks visible. So there's a red brick right there, and meltologists would argue that this entire stack was originally bricks. This is in Poland. We see these crazy melting castles, and you get this like massive effect on the bottom here. And I think I've got a better photo. This is just to show you like the whole corner of the castle is basically melting, and it's getting replaced by, if you're a geologist, you might come along and call that limestone or something that is, considered millions of years old. But clearly it was part of this hundreds of years old castle. Here's another one in Spain. It's electrified, we call them, castle, because something has happened to it, and you get these honeycomb textures and intense frying, localized features like this. This is a castle here, and they clearly did not build it like this. This part here happened after this castle was built. And once we look around the world, we see buried structures all over the place. The mound builders in the US, and lots of standing stone circles and dolmens like Stonehenge. And you can see not only is there this structure, but there's this structure here, which is circle, and then there's actually also little smaller structures around it, which I put in there. But this is another picture from a hill fort in Spain. So ring ruins, and what happened. Like there's clearly a lot going on beneath the ground. There's a zoomed out view, and this looks like it's a sort of a giant, megalithic structure that's been melted. So just to recap, are the rocks millions of years old, or are they the post-apocalyptic crystallized remains of ruins? Just for your consideration, this is a typical stratigraphic sequence through layered rocks. And then this is just a fun thing I did it with AI, just to show you that we've got, basically we live on the remains of ancient civilization that are mostly red brick, but also concrete. And I think there was gold cities, crystalline cities. There was, definitely giant trees. There were giant people. There were, giant animals. So we got all sorts of stuff going on here. But I do believe that the foundational layer is what we think of as architecture, and I'm going to explain that. So what is plasma? Because plasma is a really important thing to get your head around with the subject. Basically we don't learn anything about it. in school. So we learn about the three states of matter: gas, solid, liquid. In fact, plasma goes through all of them and is what, the official definition is as an electrically charged gas, which means that everything's got a slight electrical charge, and there's free electrons and positive ions running around. It's more like the interaction of electric fields than atoms, electromagnetic fields. That's the main thing controlling the dynamics of our realm, in my opinion. Like, in that way, you can think of nothing as being solid and everything as being part of this etheric energy field, which is the underlying matter, the other underlying life force of the world that we live in is plasma. It's chi, it's dark matter, it's ether, and it happens in the sky, it happens in the earth, it happens in our bodies, and you have to start getting your head around it if you want to start understanding the nature of our realm, because nothing is solid until the observer renders the image, and I'm going to get into that later, but I'm going to talk about plasma now. So it's the fourth state of matter, as I mentioned, and it's not just an ionized gas, but it's like a bridge between matter and energy. And like I said before, it's equated with the ether. And, I have determined is that just as sound shapes sand, frequency shapes plasma into coherent patterns. Frequency is the vibration of intent, thought, and being. And plasma is the carrier and responder to those vibrations. So the things to think about in our realm is the sun is a plasma entity broadcasting solar codes, and also ley lines, which Michelle Gibson has done a lot of really fantastic work on, and photodidactic too. Campbell is the Earth's plasma veins, which are energized by telluric currents in the Earth's crust, which are also influenced by water. Water is very important. And when we talk about plasma, it's quite interesting because then you go back on the symbolism, like when snakes have kind of been demonized with the Garden of Eden, but snakes are everywhere in our ancient symbology, and they're, in my opinion, associated with frequency, sine waves, and plasma phenomenon and electrical discharge. So this is a seven-headed serpent, and the Nagas from the Vedic texts, and the dragon guardians from Hyperborea, all about plasma. And we're going to look at types of plasma now. So what we've determined from before is that plasma can occur in the sky, it can occur in the ground, cosmic plasma, and it can occur inside us too. So what sort of understanding is that the ancients, might have been seeing these plasma effects in the sky, and that's what they recorded on in petroglyphs on cave walls, but also tablets and more sophisticated ways of recording information. This is the Spotter-Man effect, which is from Joshua James. He's done some really fantastic work on this. But it's all about how the ionized gas in the atmosphere is a particular color. And you might, why is the sky blue? Because nitrogen and oxygen are the two main elements in the sky. And when they're ionized, they're blue. That's what I see it now. So Anthony Peratt was a plasma physicist, and he was doing contained experiments with plasma, and he discovered that he created this like a glass sort of chalice, a toroidal shape in the lab, and then he noticed that the same shape was recorded in petrographs, and that's how he came to the conclusion that the people who recorded those petrographs had actually observed that event in the sky, and they might have witnessed massive plasma instabilities that they then etched in stone. So this is what I would call a plasma apocalypse, and I've done quite a lot of work on reconstructing different ancient civilizations, and one of them was Lemuria. And so Lemuria was a vapor canopy kind of environment, so it was very tranquil, and everything was growing to enormous size, and there was no rain because it was like an ambient light that was low radiation light that helped everything grow to enormous size. Actually, at the end of the Lemurian era, I think that there was a massive fire plasma event, meaning there was a lot of volcanism. We don't really know if it came from the sky or the ground, but I do I'm going to give you some evidence for both. This is evidence from the sky. They talked about the trumpet sounds. They talked about the building, like a burning building in the wormwood, like a comet crashing to Earth. They talk about unnatural auras, atmospheric buildup with energy, electricity arcing through the air, all kinds of crazy phenomena in the sky. But I do believe that the origin of a lot of the electricity comes from the ground. This is some of the work that I did with rocks or ruins, but we actually see Lichtenberg effects everywhere. A Lichtenberg effect is the phenomenon of the fractal light pattern that's left behind when there's a massive release of electrical discharge energy through an insulating material like the ground or wood or rocks, whatever. And so we see the morphology of those lightning-like fractals in the rivers, trees, etc. There's an earthquake, and you can often see lightning before earthquakes. And also, this is a sine wave through the rock when an earthquake appears. So the sine wave is a sound wave, basically, that's being propagated through the rock, and it's basically hot ionized gas. But the hot ionized gas is going, which is the plasma, is going through the rock and as a wave like this. So to my mind, that means that the plasma is the medium through which the moving. It's not a solid, it's not a liquid, it's not a gas, it's plasma. And like I said before, the plasma forms these Lichtenberg effects when the electrical discharge releases, and you get these lightning-like fractures. And this is the Grand Canyon, and this is from an orbital view of the Grand Canyon from the Smithsonian magazine, and it actually looks like a heart from a great distance, and you can see like the little vein of the Grand Canyon running through the middle of it. But this is the Colorado Plateau, and you can see all these Lichtenberg effects all around the place. And I would argue that this whole plateau was uplifted instantly, not over millions of years, as they would tell you that it took to form this incredible feature, which is the Grand Canyon. So they would say that the combination of tectonic uplift and down cutting from water erosion was the reason that this canyon formed. And I'm saying that it formed instantly from an incredibly violent fire plasma event. And volcanic lightning is very common before an eruption. And the point I'd like to make here is that the electricity actually seems to be coming from the ground. And I think that's important to think about, because we don't think enough about the Earth as being an electromagnetic medium, but actually that's what it is. Everything is governed by electromagnetism and plasma and sound frequency, which we're going to talk about. So this is what I talked about. Ancient civilizations, so Lemuria and Atlantis and Hyperborea. The Theosophical Society was founded in 1875 by this woman, Madame Blavatsky, who apparently talked incessantly in a guttural voice, sometimes witty and sometimes crudely. And she was known to love a very good cigar. And you never see a picture of her throat. She's always like this. And the Theosophical Society was associated with this, the Brothers of Azos and other secret societies who I very much doubt would put a woman in charge of society like this and house them in magnificent old world buildings around the world. So I would argue that there was soft disclosure that went on through the Theosophical Society, and I've used some of their work to inform my understanding of ancient civilizations. And if anybody wants to do a deep dive into this stuff, I think it's fascinating. So the two, main civilizations that you probably heard of are Atlantis and Lemuria, and we're going to talk about those now. So Lemuria was, like I said before, like a vapor canopy environment. There was a very high humidity and warm temperature worldwide. There was no direct sunlight. It was like a diffused glow in the sky. And from what I actually think that the sun didn't move, and it was actually Saturn. That's a conversation for another day. But rather than having a directional sun that moves across the sky, the sun just stayed fixed in the sky. And according to Genesis, there was no rain. The earth was watered by mists rising from the ground. Levi talked a lot about the trees, and I absolutely agree that there were like magnificent trees all over the world back in those days, and they were probably made of silica, and they grew to enormous size. This one, they're probably about 300 feet. Do I think that all of the building, we're going to talk about that. And they also had blue skin giants and deities, Krishna and Rama are often depicted as blue, and you also hear about red-headed giants from the North Americans, and obviously up north in the Celtic region too. And so according to the Theosophical Society, this is what the Earth looked like in the days of Lemuria, and the parts that are Lemurian are in red. So you can see that there's just, like, if you join this up on the other side, it's just like basically one big continent. So this has very important implications for how we understand our cultural connections across continents, like ethnography, I guess, because South America and Africa were joined. This is Antarctica, and this is Australia, and this is India. This is all one big landmass. So did we all at one time, I believe, lived in harmony together in one continent, and we were multiracial? And I've got a lot of evidence for that, actually. But the predominant race, you only have to look at the evidence for what they've covered up. The pyramids were built by people that we think of as looking African, even though I don't like using that word now because they've screwed around so much with the idea of race as well. And in fact, many presenters are going to show you that they would probably to North America first. So the place I'm going to head now is in the Pacific, and that's Mu. And so Mu was like a remnant of Lemuria, like after the sea level rose, and this was what was left. And it was a very, very highly advanced civilization, according to James Churchward. A series of books on Mu, which I'd highly recommend. And I don't think the map looked like this particularly, but it just gives you an idea. There's Mu and there's Atlantis, and you can see all of these little areas. There's Hawaii, Easter Island, Tonga. There's all megalithic ruins around here. And what they said is that the people that survived from Mu actually, lived on those islands, as well as migrating to territories around the edge of the Pacific. So, there's the plasma event. So what I think about Mu disappearing is that we had megalithic cities all over the realm where Mu was, as well as all around in the colonies around the outside. And Mu sank due to a massive electromagnetic pulse event, like a pole shift, that instantly killed millions of people, overloading the architectural power grid. We're going to get into that, and instantly creating plateaus, mountains, and active volcanoes. So these cities experienced an architectural grid meltdown due to a massive plasma discharge event. So the volcanoes, I interpret, and you might think I'm nuts, but I interpret them as melted pyramids, which are themselves the tops to melted megalithic structures. These are, just to give you an idea, there's pyramids all over the world, but they're definitely pyramids within the Ring of Fire that James Churchward said were colonies of Mu. And not just pyramids, but megalithic ruins. This is in Micronesia, Nadal. This is on Easter Island, Rapa Nui, and you can see similar style giants in Peru, stone giants. And this is off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni megalithic ruins. So, in my opinion, the new world is the old world. Uluru and the Olgas were part of this giant landmass, which we think of as Lemuria. And Uluru was, in my opinion, a giant megalithic structure. And I'll show you the landmass along the bottom of the ocean, bottom of the world in 1570 was a huge continent, and it was called Terra Australis Nondum Cognita, and it was joined by a land bridge to South America on many old maps. Another thing you might notice is that it's ice-free. So they like to tell us how we're in a global warming phase, but in fact, this is ice-free now, and now it's ice. So how does that make sense? In New Zealand, where I'm from, the old continent of Zealandia which they actually acknowledge is a real thing, probably extended all the way out here and, connected all these different lands together. Patupara Rehia are described by the Maori people of New Zealand as supernatural forest dwellers that had pale skin, red or fair hair and very ethereal voices, and they were human-sized and they avoided the sunlight. They weren't very friendly, and they played the flute apparently. And Kumari Kandon, this is part of the history. They speak of a great land ruled by Pagnum kings, which was taken by the sea. And you can see here that this directly connects India with Australia, with Madagascar, and probably Africa as well. This is Atlantis in its prime. So according to the Theosophical Society, there's 4 maps of Atlantis. I included one, but you can see there's a big red part right in the middle here, which I believe is the city of the Golden Gates. And there's an outline of modern day Africa. So it's sitting practically in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So there it is. And if you extrapolate it to today, it's probably sitting the center in northern Africa, which some people say is the Richelieu Eye in the Sahara Desert. And this is perhaps what it looked like if you reconstructed Atlantis according to Plato. That was sort of how he described it, which was off the Straits of Gibraltar. And Edgar Cayce talks about Atlantis too. He's the sleeping prophet, and he said that they were using crystal energy for power, including this firestone. And I think they were like using these crystals to create their cities, basically. And harness energy through the frequency fields in a harmonic resonance technology. And he said that the end of Atlantis was due to the implosion of a crystalline I'm interpreting it as a frequency field because I'm thinking in frequency. But yeah, an implosion of the crystal field, and that's what caused the great flooding, a great flood event that we see recorded in myths all around the world. There was huge devastation, millions of people killed. Popularization of stories like Noah's Ark was a direct result of events like this. And I'm going to get to time lately because people will be like, yeah, she doesn't even know when the Bible was and all that sort of stuff. But I don't really think in terms of linear time anymore, and I'm going to explain why in a minute. So this is a big giant crossing the ocean, looking pretty mad and eating people on the way. Okay. So these structures were megalithic components in an earth-wide machine. Meltologists think of our Earth as being a machine, basically a giant megalithic machine that's like a carcass of a machine that's broken down. And we see these pyramids, as I said before, all over the world that now look like what we think of as mountains, but they are clearly pyramidal shapes. And meltologists would interpret these as the tops to very large megastructures and machines, basically like possibly obelisks that extend all the way down to what we think of as the ground level in meltology, which is the bottom of the crust. So yeah, the old world was the new world in meltology. So these places were already there a long time ago, and now we've lost them to the sea. So yeah, also I just wanted to point out that this is now we're on to Tartaria as far as lost civilizations go. So you probably all know, but Tartaria was on maps, and it showed a huge part of the world from 1450 to 1700, and it was taken off maps altogether in 1850. But we see steepled cities right across the world, including the Western US, which you can see there's beautiful cities all over here in 1570, and all over Northern Africa, Barbaria and Nubia, Arabia, clearly Europe, and this is northern China. So the Genghis Khan, this is the Thunderbolt or the Neptune's fork in the Bedroom Desert. And we think that they actually went around destroying a lot of these old world cities that I showed you here, because these deserts didn't even exist at the time of this map. There was no Sahara. There was no Gobi Desert. And this is just to show you that they had plasma energy weapons, and clearly they were using them. I think Martin Liebkau has talked about the armor being actually more like a Faraday cage to prevent getting plasma burn. And this celestial phenomenon that is shown in some old paintings, and you can see orbs everywhere in the sky. And so, from what I've studied, I actually believe we live in a holographic biological universe, which is basically a computer program, a simulation. And this is one of the times, like the sky is a hologram, but this is one of the times we actually seeing like the machine behind the sky. And this might be part associated with reset events. Again, this is an example of the veil thinning between the worlds. And you probably are familiar with this map from Marion, which is like him peering through the veil and seeing all of the wheel in the sky, Ezekiel's wheel, and all of the machinery that's up there, keeping this whole crazy place going. So I think that with the use of plasma energy weapons, the parasites have actually hijacked the natural reset cycles that we see. And this is what this eye in the sky is about. I'm going to go through this because I don't have much time, but you can see lots of evidence from that from meltologii, the memory of the sky events, and total destruction. But the lightning's coming from you can see here. Oh yeah, there's Vishnu's chakra, which is like a spinning disc that you might have been actually captured in this photo, the baptism of Christ. There's clearly something that is like a disc, and it's got some lasers pointed right here, and it's generating a fire. So I think there was a total destruction of cities, like Guy said, millions and millions of people killed. This is from the French Revolution. I think they were getting rid of evidence from the old world. This is an actual picture, and I just had some fun with AI with it. I think that's a plasma energy weapon that's been used in the field to get rid of evidence of the old world from the French Revolution. And these are just some examples of fasces, which we see today still in the House of Representatives in the US. And these were the weapons that they used, and they still do, to keep us under control. The word fascism comes directly from this ancient weapon. And Guy talked this is where I got this information from, is Guy, but he talks about a massive depopulation event, hundreds of thousands, millions and billions of people dead. And what it looks like is, I don't know if this is bones, but you can see lots of examples. This is from Moscow, which is clearly something's happened to this environment. And there's what we think of as a giant just here. There's buried layers of human remains right across the world. In just Odessa, Ukraine alone, this is a map of the catacombs, 2,500 kilometers of tunnels. And there's some giants in the catacombs. And you also see these very ritualized burial of bones and such in these catacombs, like the skull and crossbones. And you see them in major cities all over the world. Petrified remains. So during the volcanic eruption events, the bodies were reduced to carbonized bones and the teeth encased in volcanic deposits. And so, I think silicification, petrification can happen very quickly. And there is evidence for that all over the world. But I will say that I think that the majority of these type of structures are megalithic ruins, and I'll explain why. Going through a few things here. So the main thing that I will say is that, like, this is the Acropolis in Greece, and you can see that there's remnants of remains here, but what it appears to be sitting on is a mount. And if you look closer at that mount, it's actually ruins grading, which is millions of years old. I've already talked about that. But then if you get up really close, you see that it's actually all red brick arches and stone arches that were originally red brick. There's the brick, now it's stone. So I would argue that when you see some of these remnants, that, like, the trees were 300 feet, these megalithic buildings, this one was like 2.4 kilometers, according to the Bible, the Tower of Babel, and it took 3 days to walk around the base. So it's pretty hard to get your head around the size of some of these structures, but enormous. So if you had something like that, what would it look like today? Well, we would argue as metallurgists, it looks something like this, like a melting butter landscape. And this is in the Four Corners area in Arizona. So you can see here, this is in Spain. This is ruins, right? These are clearly red bricks. And then this is in the Utah Monument Valley, and there's like a little aperture here. But as a geologist, you would come along and call this millions of years old, and there's a little splay skirt coming out here. You know, meltologists would interpret these as the remains of gigantic megalithic ruins. And I just wanted to show you some really cool pictures of Niagara Falls. This is the Chirripon Tower on the edge of Niagara Falls, which they said was built in 1833 and torn down as an observation tower and torn down in 1873. And if you have a look at pictures of Niagara Falls, this is the falls here, and it looks structural underneath the Niagara River. So when you say it's a hydrological power station, yeah, it probably is, but I think it's been repurposed as one rather than invented. It was originally built by giants as an ancient hydrological power station. And you can see this is an aerial view of Niagara Falls, and then there's a canal running all the way down here. This is it here, 13 kilometres all the way to a power station that's used down here. And there it is. And this is a construction photo of that same power station. And you can see that this is all, looks like it's been there forever and ever. This is supposedly a photo taken when it was being constructed, and the arches are all filled in. So they also had like industry all the way along the edge of the Niagara Falls. This is on the US side, but the water flowed through the underground canals to power turbines connected to the flour mills and machine shops. And that's all gone now. And there's also tunnels, red brick tunnels running all under the falls. And you can actually go and see them there. It's a really cool thing to do, go under the power station and have a look at these tunnels that were built by giants, in my opinion. Feet high. So the evidence is everywhere, and for sound and vibration, and the interaction of electromagnetism, sound waves, and plasma. So we can see the cymatic patterns in nature and architecture. And plasma is intimately associated with frequency, and we see these cymatic patterns in snow crystals, rose church windows, crop circles, and rocks. So this is a cymatic pattern in a rock with, clearly there's some sort of vibration that's going on here. Thank you, Tom, for this photo. It's amazing. And also star forts. So the star fort sort of geometry looks like it's sort of echoing itself. It's like a ripple effect, like a vibrational resonance pattern replicating itself. And we see like star forts all over the world, hundreds of them, and many of them have been destroyed now, but they all show this beautiful geometry. And I don't believe for an instant that they were originally designed as bastion forts. So this is important concept in meltology that pyramids, cathedrals, and star forts are essentially fried electrical components in a computer circuit board, which is overloaded during a plasma discharge event. And these energetic nodes lie at ley line intersection. So here we go. There's a ley line with a straight ley line. You get straight ley lines all over the world where the structures line up in straight lines. There's a Mont Saint Michel with all the structure underneath, and each different kind of geometry of architecture has a different function, and they also represent different resonance fields. So I'll let you read that because there's just a few things I want to get to, and I'm running out of time. But I just wanted to show you that our realm is not a fixed object, but it's a resonance container of standing waveforms. So toroidal fields are composed of electromagnetic and consciousness-based oscillations, and what we see is really interesting. As the waveform begins to bend and so reach a resonance threshold, it actually collapses, and that's what we perceive of as a reset event. And so, for example, here we've got two layers of ancient Rome, and the older buildings are in red, the Republican Roman buildings, and then it's like they've just imprinted the new geometry over the top of the old buildings, and it's literally just right over the top. So I would argue that the architectural motherboard is the foundational layer upon which the trees and the vegetation grow, so that nature is growing out of the blueprint. And you can even see here, it looks like they're even creating, it's like weaving a mat with the rays here. And this is a map of ancient Rome in 1762. So it's like there are different layers of stacked sacred blueprints, one upon the other. Crystal Palace, you can see it's very ordered. It's like the geometry has come after, like, has been placed on the, sorry, I'm losing my thought here, but the outline of the geometry has been drawn, and then the building has been resonated into existence. I'm not sure exactly how. I'm going to speculate. It's not with hammer and chisel, I can tell you that. This is Paris, and this is in China. And so nature is actually growing out of the architectural foundation. And this is also in China. The mountain here is actually, this is a very ordered basement. And then you can see this is a stupa here that the mountain's encroaching on. So the mountain was there after the temple, in my opinion, and it was probably most likely a four-sided geometrical pyramid, a bit like Borobudur in Indonesia. And so you get these divine microcosm, macrocosm style resonant architecture in the old world, which is designed to help people understand the ascension within. And you can see little Buddhas here inside the stupas. And you can see this fractal kind of geometry everywhere. Meltologists would say this setup is like a circuit board. So all of these temples were like actual components in a circuit board. So, for example, this temple here might have been a resonator, and then you'd have capacitors, generators, transformers, and they all played a specific purpose. But it was a highly sophisticated circuit board, not like you think of today. But it does actually look very much like a circuit board when you look at a LiDAR scan of Angkor Wat, for example. That's what it looks like. So this is the language of the biological circuit board, which governs the nature of our reality, which is governed by fractals and sacred geometry. And the idea that these magnificent structures were carved by hand is completely absurd to me. And so we're talking about harmonic construction techniques. So, that's what I was talking about before. Maybe they had some resonant blueprint, and they created a morphic field scaffold, and then they used like sonic rods and tuning forks and crystal amplifiers to grow the building, basically, vibrated into position. Levitation, I'm not sure. So this is how I envision the earth. Each layer on this sacred mother earth is a different vibrational state of consciousness at the time of its information. So the frequency or the vibrational state of consciousness at the time of this civilization is actually preserved in the rocks, but also in the cymatics and the crop circles and the architecture, and they're all different. This is just an example of, like they look like a mandala. So if you could like, doesn't look like a regular circuit board. It looks more like a mandala to me. That's where the whole thing is a mandala, and the lotus flower and the blooming comes from is the sacred flower of life. So yeah, you probably figured out, I think, the world in terms of a catastrophic model. So the Earth is not 4.5 billion years old. In fact, it doesn't even work on a linear time frame. It's much, much shorter. And we see evidence for that all over the world. The Hopi people talk about the ant people, who were these strange sort of humanoids with antenna-like heads that would help them in between resets to go underground before a reset happened, in order to help them survive. And they said that they didn't actually like it much down there and wanted to come back. But I just wanted to make a note about time, because I think it's really important that time is not linear. It's a cycle, and at the end of the cycle, it gets reset back to zero. Perhaps the best example of that is the Mayan calendar. But in actual fact, it's actually the Olmec calendar, which well predates it's a pre-Columbian civilization that predates the Mayans and the Aztecs, but they all use the same calendar. And you can look at that in your own time. But I just wanted to show you that this idea of catastrophic resets just permeates the culture everywhere. You get these serpents, and then a bar bird or a phoenix or an eagle these days. Represents the time between the resets, and then this is another reset, which is represented by the snake, the plasma event. And so there are cycles within cycles, as I said before. According to the Olmec calendar, these cycles happen every 52 years. And there's basically like two different calendar systems going on with their calendar. One at 260 days, which is a ritual calendar associated with the moon cycles, standing waves, 365 days solar calendar. So when those two calendars came together, a particular portal, the veil between the worlds would open up, and they're very predictable. They knew that when they were coming, and they had rituals around these portals opening up, and they knew they were very vulnerable to catastrophe at those particular times. So the last one was 1507, not last one, but last one that we knew about with the Aztecs, and that was when the Aztecs were at Tenochtitlan in Mexico City, which is shown here. And if you count 52 years forward in the Gregorian calendar from that date, the next one is at 2027. So it doesn't mean that we're necessarily all going to get burnt in a big fire or anything. It's just, it means the veil is lifting. And I feel like all of us are feeling that now. And I just want to encourage everyone not to be all doom and gloom, because I really feel like this is a very exciting time in human history. And in fact, with these portals opening up, the energies are increasing if you're open to experiencing them. And just to show you that these reset cities make no sense on the timelines. Like this is Tenochtitlan in 1521 when it was destroyed by the Spanish, and then they didn't start draining the lake. This is Lake Texaco until 1607, and yet here's Mexico City built right on top of it, and they started building this cathedral in 1573. According to the official narrative. So this guy's done some really cool stuff on reconstructing Tenochtitlan. There's Templo Maya. And just to show you that it makes no sense. Like there's literally like, this is a Templo Maya, and it's underneath this beautiful cathedral, literally right underneath. And you can see cooked out red bricks right here. And the lava wall is melting over the temple steps, and modern day. So we're basically living in a cubist hell, and it's all by design. And the mud flood was likely a part of that reset event. And as I said before, it was, like probably a plasma event. It may have come from the sky. It may have come some from the earth too, but it certainly caused a lot of flooding and probably brick ash, which is like a particulate falling from the sky. But, whatever was in the way would get caught up in the flood, and probably some liquefaction too. There's India, Dunedin, Liverpool entrance here, and you can see how absurd the narrative is. Nothing has changed. We still live under a fascist regime, and once you start to understand the language of symbolism, the veil drops away. So everything is inverted in this realm. War is peace, freedom is slavery. It's all smoke and mirrors, though, and so it's up to you to whether you want to let them manipulate your perception. I try and show how everything that we observe in this, like the way we experience the world, is a little bit like a video game. So if you are not interacting with it, it doesn't exist. Effectively, it stays in a waveform or a code. Yeah. So that's really important, because if you think about the analogy of like a tree falling in the forest, and nobody's around to hear it, does it make a noise? No, it doesn't, because until you interact with that tree, either the sound of it or the, viewing it, it doesn't exist. It's in a waveform. So I feel like this is fundamental to our understanding of our realm, that everything is sound, frequency, and plasma, electromagnetism. And we live in a biological computer, but in fact, because we are electromagnetic beings ourselves, we are the mirror. And everything, like reality, we are happening to reality, not the other way around.